Hello and welcome to a quick look at the PC port of Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2. The first game on PC was pretty fine, to be perfectly honest, and this game is really not that big of an exception. In fact, it's an improvement in a lot of ways, though there are some niggles here and there that we will tackle that really should have been fixed. So let's get into it, let's not waste any time. The graphics options, this is pretty much the meat of the port, the thing that everyone cares about. From the top, resolution, much like the last game, the game does support up to 4K. Having recently upgraded to 1440p, it is very nice to see that this is still included. Those with ultra-wide may be disappointed. I know the last game didn't support ultra-wide resolutions, but there were mods that worked fairly well even if the HUD was stretched. There hasn't been any news that they've changed this or updated this. I don't have an ultra-wide monitor to check, and trying to fake the resolution on my 16:9 monitor just wasn't working out. So if you do have an ultra-wide, please let me know in the comment section below if it works or not. My gut says no, but we will see. Next up, the refresh rate. I have a 160Hz monitor. Many people have high refresh rate monitors. The most common is 144Hz. It is so nice to see that, much like the first game, this game does support refresh rates of pretty much any number you can think of, which is great. Unfortunately, the frame rate is capped at 150, so while the majority of people who have refresh rates under that will be absolutely fine, the small minority of us who do have refresh rates above that are left a little bit disappointed. It's not the end of the world. I 100% appreciate that fighting games are generally locked at a very low frame rate, so it is good to see that it is unlocked to an extent. Display mode supports full screen, windowed, and windowed borderless. Great stuff to have. I know that lots of people love windowed borderless for easy alt-tabbing. Skipping down a couple since we've covered some of the above, Fxaa, the anti-aliasing method in the game, is only an on and off option, and Fxaa, as many of you will know, is quite a blurry post-processing effect, so I strongly recommend turning it off and forcing your preferred method via your graphics card control panel. Either way, I think you'll definitely notice an improvement over the console's very poor anti-aliasing methods. I know that having played the beta and then playing the PC version, the aliasing was significantly lower than the console version, so that's great to see. Next are two new options. This is distance scaling and texture quality. With the game moving to next-gen consoles, it's now bigger, it's way more dense, so having this option is very nice. Distance scaling is of course the draw distance in the game, so those of you with low-end rigs will be very happy to see this. I should mention that this game is optimized wonderfully. It's not very demanding either, so those with reasonable rigs should be absolutely fine, and most of the options that I'm going to be talking about are mainly aimed at those with weaker rigs who are sort of desperately trying to get as many frames as possible. So yes, distance scaling will absolutely help that now that the game is bigger. Weaker rigs will obviously want to try and maintain as many frames as possible, so cutting down the level of detail in the background will obviously help that. Next is texture quality, and while this doesn't really have the most significant effects on the visuals, it will obviously help, again, those with lower end rigs who don't have video cards with the greatest amount of VRAM, for example. Moving on to the advanced settings now, as you can probably tell, a lot of this stuff isn't new. This is exactly what we saw in Xenoverse 1, but some of the most notable changes are the inclusion of being able to change whether there is any grass in the game, because this is a very green and grassy game, and while it probably isn't gonna, have the biggest performance impact, again, for those with lower end rigs, it's extra frames that you probably vitally need. I think the most significant thing here is probably the massive particles and the character limit. I think the character limit is probably the most impactful. Obviously, this game does have an MMO component, so when you're in the hub world and there are a crazy number of players all around you, your FPS does tend to tank quite a lot. So what the character limit does is obviously limit the number of players on screen, which significantly helps your frame rate. So that is a wonderful inclusion and something that was definitely a big omission from the previous game. Next up is the massive particles option, which is a hilarious name. This wasn't included in the first game, but in the second game, the key effects, the crazy particles that fly off of your character, are even more detailed than they were before, and they definitely have a bit of a performance impact. So being able to turn those off does limit the visual quality of the game by a little bit, but you will see some decent enough performance gains there. Light shafts is another new one. It's, again, not the biggest detail in the world, but it's more frames that you'll be able to pull back. So that's the graphics menu. As you can see, there are a pretty good number of options, some pretty major changes from the first game that definitely help performance. I think, as I said, those with reasonable rigs, those who are, PC gaming on the regular are probably not going to have any issues with this game. You'll be hitting the frame rate cap with almost no issues. I think many of these options are for those with very low-end rigs who are very desperately trying to run the game. So that is, it's nice to see. Anyway, let's take a look at the controls, because I think there's some very strange decision making going on here. As you can see, I'm navigating the menu right now with a keyboard. No mouse. There's no mouse control in the menu for some strange reason. Yet if we try and rebind some keys, you'll see that there's actually very good keyboard support, which is very odd. For example, I can change my Dragon Radar here to mouse 5. It's very rare to see side buttons being able to be used in ports that don't have mouse support in the menu, so very strange inconsistency going on there. Of course, it is a fighting game. I'll be very surprised if many people are trying to play the game with a keyboard and mouse, but yeah, it's strange all the same. Before I wrap things up with some comparison screenshots of the different graphical settings, I do want to just quickly head into the game settings here and talk very briefly about the language options. It's not very specific to the PC version, I hope, but I think it's worth mentioning all the same. When you boot up the game, it obviously defaults to English. There's a lengthy cutscene that starts. It's all in English. You can't actually watch it the first time you boot the game in your preferred language, since it appears before the menu. If you then head into the menu and change your game to Japanese, save, quit, relaunch it, the opening cutscene is still in English, even though the rest of the game is now with the Japanese cast. I don't know if that's a bug with all of the versions of the games across all the different platforms, but it was very strange, and I really do want to see that scene in Japanese. So I don't really know what's going on there, but it's worth mentioning. Anyway, just to wrap things up before I leave you with these screenshots, this is a wonderful port. It's absolutely fine. It's essentially what you got before, but better and more suited to those with weaker rigs. So if you ran the previous game just fine, you're going to have no issue with this one. If you have a weaker rig and you're slightly worried about being able to run this, considering it's a next-gen game technically, you should probably be okay. Dimps have done a pretty good job for the most part. There are the little niggles that we've spoken about, and, they are niggles. They are very minor nitpicks, and considering this is a Japanese game, Japanese developers are certainly not known for their quality PC ports. It's kind of nice to see some of the options on offer here. So, yeah, I'm happy with it. I'm excited to go and dig into the game now. Be sure to follow me on Twitter to be notified of when the main review comes out. But for now, enjoy these screenshots, and I will see you next time.